الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولله ملك السماوات والأرض ويوم تقوم الساعة يومئذ يخسر المبطلون وترى كل أمة جاثية كل أمة تدعى إلى كتابها اليوم تجزون ما كنتم تعملون هذا كتابنا ينطق عليكم بالحق إنا كنا نستنسخ ما كنتم تعملون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our sixth session in our series looking at 50 verses of the Quran regarding community development. Yesterday, we reflected upon the verses that provide for you and I a spectrum of understanding of what the identity of a Muslim community ought to be, what its values are, and from there we are able to work from. Tonight, inshallah, we reflect upon how those values should then inform the institutions of our community. Tomorrow's discussion will feed off the back of that, in that our institutions are made up primarily of volunteers. What are the qualities of volunteers for the community according to the Quran? So as yesterday we started, in terms of the sequence, the order, I was thinking about the central values of a community. Those then inform the institutions of the community, and those, of course, mold the way in which the community workers reflect those values. For tonight, we start with context of our institutions and how those are for our communities. Our institutions are numerous. The institutions, for example, that make up the institutions above the community, the umbrella organizations, and the institutions within the community as well. For example, it might be the institution of the pulpit. It might be the institution of the madrasa. It might be the institution of the executive committee. All of these are different institutions across the spectrum of the community. How does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speak of them? Primarily tonight, we think of them in two ways. Number one, in terms of the reverence of them, and number two, in terms of holding them to account. And when these two things are present in the balance between them, neither excessively in one way towards the reverence of the community, nor in holding them to account in which way that reduces the appreciation of those institutions, what comes from this is a community that values those institutions in the right way. When those institutions falter, for any reason, because there is the normative practice of holding them to account, both the individuals of the community and the institutions themselves grow together. When there is an imbalance between the two, then what occurs is either the institution feels that it is fully autonomous, does not have to be held to account by anybody, or the people themselves go away from those institutions because the institutions themselves do not feel like they are being valued in the right way. Therefore, there needs to be the balance between these various pushes, these groups, in order to deal with the institutions correctly. Start with Surah An-Nisa, chapter number 4, verse number 83. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about two things. The first thing He speaks about is the issue of war. And when there comes to be sensitive information that a community needs not to prattle and to talk unnecessarily about things that might give the game away, that might upend the way in which a community needs to be able to protect the information at hand. Yet, on the other side, there is the balance in this same ayah, that when there does need to be matters of verification within a community, there needs to be higher levels of authority that people can return the matter to and have trust that those people in the higher levels of authority are independent, are capable, and have the best interests of the community and truth at hand. That they are not going to be corrupted by their own preferences and desires. Let us have a look at this particular verse. We can see it in its historical content or context, and then also see it in the modern day context as well. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَإِذَا جَاءَهُمْ أَمْرٌ مِّنَ الْأَمْنِ أَوِ الْخَوْفِ أَذَاعُوا بِهِ. And when there comes to them news about matters of security or fear, as you know, many a times the Muslim community were going to war because of either what was occurring internally inside the city of Medina, or because of what was occurring externally to them. Sometimes internally in Medina, those Jewish communities that had actually written peace treaties with the Muslim community, with the Ummah, they were considered part of the Ummah. The Jewish communities that had written peace treaties with the Ummah, sometimes they broke those peace treaties, particularly three different communities, Banu Qurayza, Banu Qaynuqa, and Banu Nadir. Externally, of course, there were the Meccan communities, and even further afield, the Christian communities that would eventually want to go to war with the Muslim communities. From time to time, when there were spies that had heard about what was occurring internally or externally to the Muslim community, or there was conversations regarding war or strategy, certain individuals within the Muslim community were unable to keep shtum, as we would say today. They were unable to hold their tongues about sensitive matters, and so they spread the issues further abroad, allowing spies within Medina and external to hear about what was the strategic movement that was occurring at the hands of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, this weakened the Muslim community from within. A community needs to know when to speak, when not to speak. When it is valuable to speak, when it is better to hold one's information or their cards closer towards their chest. This is part of the wisdom of a community. The early Muslim community did not necessarily have all of these wisdoms, and so this verse, in strengthening the Muslim community about this matter, was revealed as a way of reprimanding those who are unable to hold their tongue on sensitive matters. وَإِذَا جَاءَهُمْ أَمْرٌ مِّنَ الْأَمْنِ أَوِ الْخَوْفِ. Now this verse tells us about two important things when it comes to the protection of the Muslim community. What is important is the aman of the Muslim community, the security of the Muslim community, and keeping them away from khawf, from matters of fear or things that would ultimately harm them. The Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, has a narration in which he says, "La khayra fil watan illa ma'al amni was surur." There is no value to living in a place unless that it has aman and surur, security, safety, and happiness. These are from amongst the maqasid, the things that are needed to be the higher aspirations, the things that are protected in a Muslim community. When there were matters being discussed regarding aman and khawf, adha'u bihi. What happened? Certain people would spread the discourse abroad, allowing it to reach ears that it should not do. Allah Jalla Jalaluhu now gives them the point. It says, instead of you speaking amongst yourselves when you shouldn't have, وَلَوْ رَدُّوهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ وَإِلَى أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ. If they had just referred the matter to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and those in authority from amongst them, لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُمْ. If they had just referred it to the right authorities, what would have happened? Those amongst them that could have had the capacity, the knowledge to search out what was true, they could have dealt with the matter accordingly. This tells us that the ultimate institution was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he also had people amongst him who were mutakhassisin, specialists in particular matters. In this context, about the defense of the community, the militarization of the community, whatever it might have been about the defense of the community. There were those who were the specialists and they had knowledge. What type of knowledge? الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُمْ. They had the capacity to do istinbat. Istinbat, linguistically, means to be able to draw water from a deep well. Meaning what? That the people were capable of a deep dive into the matter to understand the depths of the matter and then pull up the knowledge and show the knowledge that might have been relative to that particular issue. Here we can see from the Quranic perspective that a community does need to have sound institutions. Institutions that people can go back to, which means that they know who those institutions are, that those individuals have the trust of the community, that when someone gives them a matter, the community expects them to be able to deal with the matter, proper capability, proper knowledge, proper wisdom, proper insight. Otherwise, that there is no point in having those institutions there in the first place if the community themselves cannot trust those institutions. What value would it have been if the people had then returned it to the specialist in Medina, if those specialists in Medina themselves were incapable of dealing with the matter? وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَاتَّبَعْتُمُ الشَّيْطَانَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the context of the verse very beautifully now it tells us, were it not for the grace of Allah and His mercy, you would have certainly followed the shaitan, but a few of you would have done that. Many of you would have ended up following shaitan in his plots, and the community would have been weakened from within. Here we can see from this ayah that there must be those institutions present, and what qualities and what features that they have. And then if we do not go back to those institutions for the protection of the community, as an outcome, shaitan allows himself to enter into the community becomes weakened as a result of this. You know, in many a time recently, we have seen that when the community has come together to pull off great feats of revolution and evolution, there have been people that have either misunderstood the matter, and so when they speak of it, they bring down what is occurring, or just like in this particular verse, in the context of 1400 years ago, they would speak in a way that allowed the enemy from within to take hold of the matter, and the Muslim community would lose the strength that they had gained, or the matter of surprise that they had therein. This happens often. And it required this verse to allow people to introspect in on themselves as to when they should be speaking, when they should not be speaking. When is the right time to discuss an issue? When is the right time to spread an issue? When is the right time to be able to hold one's tongue and to reflect in upon themselves? There was an incident that occurred many years ago now, and this is a story that was told to me by people who, or a family unit that were very much in the know of these matters. In the period of Saddam, la'natullahi alayh, as you know, the Maraja al-Kiram, may Allah bless them, had worked hard to be able to overthrow Saddam, and many a time there was a movement with Muslims, with the Shia, with the wider Iraqi community to be able to overthrow Saddam. There was an incident that took place where His Eminence Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, had organized a demonstration. And the idea behind this demonstration was that this would be the demonstration where we attack the government building and we actually overthrow the government. We will institute an insurrection, take over the government apparatus, and this would be it. We would force Saddam out. The plan was afoot. What was the plan? The women folk would walk at the front, they would march at the front of the demonstration, the men at the back. And inside the clothes of the women, they would be carrying weapons, automatic rifles, AK-47s and things like this. And of course, because it would be inside their garments, they would not be checked. As they approach the government building, the men or the women were then to split into lines, and the men were to walk between them, and very quietly and secretly, the men were to take the weapons, go to the front, and then storm the building. This was well prepared. And it came to the night of the plan. However, some other individuals from amongst the Shia community from Iran received word about this and started speaking on the radio amongst themselves about the plan that was due to occur the next morning. They would say, we give, support, and we look forward to the Shia being successful tomorrow in their movement and revolution. And of course, anyone who's listening to the radio would have known something was afoot. Immediately, thousands of Saddam's soldiers were placed onto the streets, and the demonstration was unable to take place. The Shia community was within hours away, maybe, of overthrowing Saddam and building a completely different Iraq at that time. Look at this verse. When there comes to them the matter regarding security and fear, they spread it abroad. Subhanallah. But if they had just referred it to the apostle and to those in authority amongst them, then those who were in authority could have performed the istinbat, the bringing up of the water from the deep well, such that proper knowledge about the matter could have occurred. The point here shows us that as a community, there needs to be a deeper wisdom as to how we act. Foresight, planning, and understanding that as a community we have those infrastructures available to us, but most importantly here in the context of which we speak, that those institutions are capable and build the trust between the community and themselves. When trust is broken down, there needs to be a severe effort put in to replace that institution or to be able to rebuild the trust of that institution. Otherwise, as the ayah says, وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَاتَّبَعْتُمُ الشَّيْطَانَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That shaitan would have been followed by the majority of people because his presence would have been in the middle of the matter. Having seen this as a foundational verse, let us move to some other ayat and think about what the institution should represent, how it should take account of itself. The first thing for you and I is, if we turn to chapter number 11, Surah Hud, verse number 29, if I recall. This verse is mentioned twice within the Quran and mentioned with two different prophets. The institutions which are truly representing the divine, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alih, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. The purpose of these institutions are certainly to be able to protect the minds and the hearts and the dignity and the pocket of those less fortunate than them. Protect the hearts, meaning protect the deen, ihtifad al-deen. Protecting the minds, ihtifad al-aqal. Protecting the dignity and the agency of people. Protecting the pockets, the property of people, ihtifad al-mal. Now with this, what you'll find is that in the Quran there is a repeated theme that often when the prophets were performing their tabligh and their da'wah, the people that flocked towards them were often the poorest folk, the ones who were the most downtrodden of the society, the ones that had no social value in the eyes of the powerful of the society. The society's leaders never considered there to be value in the ordinary folk. And so when the prophets were actually performing their tabligh and new Muslims or those following those prophets came about them, flocked towards them, the way the powerful, understand my words, the way the powerful judged the value of the prophets was whether the powerful were flocking towards the prophets or not. If the powerful were going towards the prophets, then the prophets would have maybe had more followers. They would have said, we the powerful will also go in this direction. But so long as we see the paupers, the poor of the community, the ordinary folk of the community going towards these people, then we don't have any value for the prophet. The institution of prophethood always understood the downtrodden of its community, always protected the neediest of its community. And when people tried to create a problem between the ordinary people and the prophets of the community, the prophets went out of their way to say that we are supportive of the poor, the weak within the community, and this is the way our community ought to be. Can I grab you for 1 second? Do you mind just pressing? It's got a low battery. If you just press close, it will carry on the stream. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. The powerful of the community never valued the poor. Whereas if you will see the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they went out of their way to be able to value the poor and ensure that there was no distance placed between them and the downtrodden of the community that socially had no value. Have a look, Surah Hud, verses 29, 30. You'll see in this example, it is the story of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam, he was told by his people, why do you value these poor people? If you had a proper message, we the powerful would have flocked towards you. Verse number 29. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَيَا قَوْمِ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ مَالًا. My people, I don't ask you for any wealth in return for what I am doing. In ajriya illa ala Allah. My reward is but with Allah. وَمَا أَنَا بِطَارِدِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And I do not drive away, I do not shun those people who believe. Now the context of this, and it is repeated elsewhere in the Quran, the context of this is that the powerful folk would say to the Prophet, if you had any goodness in you or in your message, it wouldn't be the poor people following you. It would be us, powerful, the rich, the big of reputation within the community. We would have followed you. If you look at the institution of nubuwwah here, the way it valued people was not basing their value upon their reputation, upon their wealth, not valuing them upon their power base within the community. The institution of nubuwwah valued people based on their iman and amal salih. When an institution becomes riddled, becomes nothing more than a boys' club for the same people to pass power between themselves, and is not an institution that actually allows for the ordinary people to come up and to place themselves within the institution, know for sure that the institution is no longer representing the values of nubuwwah and imam. When an institution becomes nothing more than a boys' club, and the same people get to pass power between themselves and determine the futures of the community without understanding the voice of the ordinary person to represent the needs of the ordinary person, the movement of the mind of the ordinary person, then know that institution has fallen out of favor with the institution of nubuwwah and imam. You can see this in many ayat. Maybe we don't have time to continue now, tonight, to be able to represent this further within the Quran. But if you turn to chapter number 18, Surah Al-Kahf, you will see the famous conversation between Prophet Khidr alayhi salam and Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Have a look, for example, from around verse 69, the story begins. You know that Prophet Musa alayhi salam goes towards Prophet Khidr and says that I have been instructed to be able to learn from you. قَالَ سَتَجِدُونِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ صَابِرًا وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا. He said, if Allah pleases, you will find me patient and I shall not disobey you in any matter. Now here, in this story, we have two prophets. One prophet is Musa alayhi salam. This is not an ordinary prophet of God. We have another prophet who appears to be very specialist in his task. And you know very well the story, the three different incidents that occur in front of the eyes of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And each time he asks the question of what is going on? Why have you acted in this way? And each time Khidr alayhi salam responds by saying, قَالَ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ الصَّبْرَ. Did I not say that you would not be able to have patience with me? This raises a question when it comes to the relationship between peoples and institutions. Do people not have the right to be able to ask a higher institution questions or hold them to account? Musa alayhi salam, every time he sees something, he asks, why did you do this? Why did you do that? In today's language, in Arabic, we say shaffafiyya. There is transparency and accountability in your actions. Why have you done it this way? For what reason? Now in verse number 76, you will see how Musa alayhi salam reveres the institution. But there has become this dialogue where he's been told not to ask, not to hold Prophet Khidr accountable for his actions. قال إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني فقد بلغت من لدني عذرا. He said, if I ask you about anything after this, keep me not in your company. Indeed, you shall have then found an excuse in my case. At this point, even Musa alayhi salam gives up on asking any further questions, because he's been told time and time and time again that you cannot ask, that you will not be able to understand, you will not be able to keep up with this particular matter. Eventually, after the third time, at this point, Khidr alayhi salam in verse 78 says, قَالَ هَذَا فِرَاقُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنِكَ سَأُخْبِرُكَ بِتَأْوِيلِ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. Now I will inform you of the significance of that which you did not have patience for. Meaning what? At that time, maybe it was not for Musa alayhi salam to have asked certain questions. But later on, even though it may not have been right at the time, Khidr alayhi salam still explained himself in its entirety, still made sure that people understood what they needed to understand in order for Musa to have confidence in Khidr alayhi salam, in order to have confidence in his knowledge. It's a very beautiful dialectic here between two prophets, and it gives us this kind of understanding between the institution, its reverence in one place, but yet even the highest institution did not see itself above and was not responsible to give out the explanation in order for it to have clarification on its decision-making processes. This is a very lengthy discussion, but just to give you an ishara on how the ayat of Quran build this picture about this particular matter. Now here there are many verses to talk about, many ayat that we could go into, but I also want to mention to you a couple of ahadith as well. And you will find that individuals in institutions, ahadith tell them that they should also hold themselves to account. When people come to them and tell them that there has been a wrong that has been done, it's very easy for us to feel personally attacked. It's very easy for us to immediately respond by saying, no, I am in the right because I know what you don't know. Whereas if you look at the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they tell a person, ponder, contemplate over your own actions, especially when someone comes to you and says that you have done something wrong whilst you are in office. This hadith comes to us from our fifth Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. He says the following: ponder about what is said about you. Contemplate deeply on what people have to say about you. If after you've pondered and you come to know about something, a vice that exists within yourself, a flaw that exists within yourself, then know that to lose honor with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a graver calamity than if you lose honor with the people. Hold yourself to account and know that if you actually find what that person has said about you is true, Allah actually knows that about you. He is going to hold you more accountable than the people are going to hold you accountable. To lose honor with Allah is a worse calamity than if you admit to people that you have done wrong, if you admit to people that you're not supposed to be holding this institution, no longer capable of running this institution, whatever it may be. And if your condition is contrary to what has been said about you, you're actually in the right, you come to contemplate and find that you are actually in the right, then know that you have earned a reward without any physical labor. You've not really had to put any real difficulty into the matter. You've just been sitting there and thinking and being honest with yourself. If you find that you are in the right, you have earned the reward without any due hardship upon yourself. Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam told people to hold themselves to account when they are in these institutions and people come to them. There's another hadith, the last one that I wish to be able to mention for tonight, which comes to us from our 10th Imam Al-Hadi, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. And Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam tells us something very interesting. And he says, understand that institutions are not inseparable from the times in which they live in. They are not inseparable from the environments in which they find themselves in. People are not separable, or inseparable rather, from the institutions and the reputations of the institutions that they find themselves in. When there is an environment of distrust, it is normal then for people to act with distrust towards an institution, and that is not bad, that is not negative in the eyes of Islam. When, however, there is an environment and a normalcy of trust and good consciousness and good practice and good faith, it is problematic for someone to distrust the institution and to lower the esteem of the institution unnecessarily. This is a hadith from the Imam. Let's have a look at the Imam alayhi salam. When a time comes, actually this hadith, may Allah take us, if you've been to Samarra, to the shrine of Imamain al-Askariyain, salamullahi alayhima, and you go to the mat'am, where you can actually get fed. They might feed you some rice or something like that. I don't know if you've been. Get some rice, get some yogurt. Inside the mat'am, inside the takeaway, the restaurant, this hadith is actually written on the walls inside the haram of Imam alayhi salam. This is how well known this hadith is. And of course, you know that this is speaking at the time of caliphs like Al-Mutawakkil, Al-Abbasi, and these sorts of caliphs. Imam is speaking in an important context. When a time comes that justice, goodness overwhelms, when justice, goodness overwhelms cruelty, such that cruelty is not present, negativity, evil is not present, it is prohibited for you to form a negative conjecture, a bad opinion about anyone, except when one knows for sure about him that is the case. We normally call this husnul dhan, good opinion. When the environment is good, your opinion should be very good of people. And whenever a time comes that cruelty and oppression overwhelms justice and goodness, then one must not have a good opinion about a person until it is proven otherwise. When an institution has proven itself above board, it is owed that reverence. It is owed that loyalty. When an institution has proven to become a failure, now it has to work the opposite way. It has to go out of its way to demonstrate otherwise that it has regained your trust. And until then, you very much have the right to be able to question and to query from it. Hadith of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. Here, there are many verses in a hadith that talk to us about our institutions. The purpose of this was to be able to reflect on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the importance of institutions and the reverence of institutions and the qualities that must exist within them. At times, you and I may find that our institutions do not have those qualities. We have choices to step back, allow them to fall. We have other choices to be able to help those institutions, to hold them to account, to raise the bar again as they once were or as they ought to be. For you and I, the most important institution in Islam is to uphold the rights of people. After upholding the rights of people, it is to uphold the progress of people, to make sure that the communities are moving forward in the right direction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an important ayah when it comes to this, and He says, لا تفسدوا الأرض بعد إصلاحها. Do not corrupt the earth after it has been made good. When an institution has been made good and we receive it, we are obligated to protect it and to improve upon it. And the opposite is also true. We are prohibited from distorting it, from destroying it, because we have a responsibility to uphold the things that we have inherited. And these are various different discussions for now that we can have on the issue of our institutions. Tomorrow, inshallah, we will look at the ayat of the Quran which talk about the qualities of volunteers in the community. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin.